Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to create motion blur effects directly within Poser. So this image here uh, is basically a double exposure motion blur photography effect. I think this is created actually in Photoshop, where they just layered three images one on top of the other. And it's definitely the case that you can use Photoshop to create a lot of very specialized effects, but you can also create effects directly within Poser. So I'm going to show you two different ways of creating motion blur. So first of all, what we're going to do is blur this fan. So the fan blades are selectable separately, and for those of you who watched my animation primer the other week or month, whenever I upload it, you'll know that the easy way to animate is using the timeline here. So all I need to do is just go forwards 2 frames and set a keyframe, add a keyframe here. So I add a keyframe, so I'm just going to drag that across there so it's not a bit on the edge of the screen. There you go. So I've dragged that across, and there's now there's now one keyframe here on frame 3 and one keyframe on frame 0. And at the moment, if I scrub through the timeline, there's no change. But if I go to frame 3 now and add an amount of spin, let's say 25 degrees, 26, whatever, it's not a science that you need to be completely accurate on. And now what I do is I go to the intermediate frame, and the tweening effect, that's the automatic animation generation of Poser, will create the steps from here, the start frame, to here, the end frame. And I'm just going to go to frame 2, and now I'm just going to go to render settings, and I'm going to turn on motion blur. So just be careful if you use the presets here. So I'll do optics fast. It turns the motion blur effect off. So on fast, I'll click motion blur and then render that. Hopefully that shouldn't be too long. And you'll see some rotational blur there now. And the amount of blur is determined by the number of degrees that you rotated in your keyframe. So if I go to keyframe 3 again, and now I change that from 25 to 150, say, and then go back and render that second frame again, you'll see that's blurred almost to invisibility. It's just a kind of an almost cartoon effect there. So I'll just undo that a second. So it's back to 12. And I want you to see something else. So if I render this now at optics high, obviously when you're creating, when you're testing out ideas, you'll often render them a low optics setting just for speed. And then when you go to high, you'll find that the motion blur effect is quite significantly different. So I'll just render that. And you'll see here that the blur is a lot more subtle than it was on this original, whatever degrees that was, 12 degrees. So the essence of motion blur is creating movement and then rendering so that you get that movement. Now I'm going to show you it with this figure here. This is Vicky 4, and I'm just going to select her body, and you might recall that whatever you do in the first frame propagates through all the other frames unless you add additional keyframes. So at the moment we know that we've got a keyframe in frame 3 to animate that thing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to keyframe 3 now, and I'm actually going to delete that keyframe. And then I'm going to return to the first frame. I'm going to take Vicky. I'm going to turn her 190 degrees in the y-axis just so that you can see what's about to happen. Sorry, it was 190 degrees. 90 degrees, sorry. just so she's sideways on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply an animation. So this is from a set called School Gym, and I'm going to choose this bike animation here. And when I apply it, the bike animation has over 100 frames, but the default animation here is just 30 frames, I believe, or 60. So it offers to add frames to the scene to import the complete animation. And I'm going to select yes. Okay, that's actually turned that round to the front. That's kind of annoying. Okay, so I'll just turn her back round and hopefully, okay, I don't know why it's chosen a different pivot point now, but I'll just do -90 and reset a position back to here where we can see her. It depends how those keyframes have been added. They may have keyframed the position as well. Yeah, they have. Okay, that's really annoying. Whenever people save animations, let me open the animation palette. So I'll just show you part of this animation palette, just make sure it doesn't stop. Right, so here's the animation palette, and you can see that they've keyframed every 7 frames here, but they've also somehow keyframed her position using probably her hips. And that can be quite annoying because a lot of the times when you want to apply a pose, you want the pose to apply wherever the figure is. And by keyframing the hip position, it now forces it to be this way round, which is going to be a pain. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to rotate the camera, which is not going to be quite so good for the lighting, but hopefully you'll get the point. So rotate the camera here and zoom in so as we can see her, and hopefully they haven't keyframed the camera as well. Let's just have a quick, oh, darn it. I rotated the camera, not on keyframe 1. So I'm just going to undo that a second. So I'm going to go back to frame 1. And I'm going to go to here. So now this is, I've just applied the animation. Keyframe 1, I'm now going to rotate here and zoom in. And provided they haven't keyframed the camera, that camera position should propagate throughout the entire scene. So looking here, there's just one keyframe here for the camera. It's possible that they have another one right at the end. Let me just have a little flick through. In fact, I would say it's even probable. Oh, no, it's not. No, I should have been able to tell because there's no section markers here. So that should maintain that now. As I scrub through that, we see that from sideways on. And you can see that her legs are animating as she does a cycle, like, you know, a cycle in the gym. Now, you might think here, because there are frames in between every single frame, that if I render that, I'll get motion blur, and you would be right. So let's go back down to, here's the first frame. I'll go to the second frame, but you'll look at the amount of movement between frame 1 and frame 2, almost none. So when I then keyframe that, when I then render that with motion blur, you'll see one of the problems. So I turn motion blur on, but I'll actually take that back down to low quality and turn that back on there, because otherwise it's going to take too long to render, just to show you that it doesn't work. So you can see here there's almost no motion blur at all. And that's because motion blur is affected by the amount of change from one frame to another, be it rotation, translation, just moving it around any way you want, scaling, lighting, anything. So here's a little trick that you can do. So you'll see here that there's 97 frames. So when I added that animation, it added another, whatever it was, 67 frames or 37, depending if it was 30 frames here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to animation and I'm going to do retime animation. And what this enables me to do is to compress the animation down into a small amount of time. So I'm going to take all frames from 1 to 97 and I'm going to compress them down to 20 frames. That may be enough, it may not. But now what you'll find is that that entire animation occurs in theory. Okay, that's not actually worked. Let me try that again. Retime animation. Okay, 20 frames. Everything. Okay, so, oops, daisy. Oh, how annoying. So there, so after 20 frames, there's no more animation. It just holds the last frame. So that should now mean that the movement between each frame is much more significant. So if I now come to this frame and look at the next frame, look how far her legs move. So now when I do a render of that, hopefully with motion blur still on, it should have kept our settings. Yes, it has. Now when I render that, look how much more significant the motion blur is. So that's just a nice little trick. If you're using an animation from somewhere else, you can use that to create motion blur when it otherwise wouldn't be obvious. So there you go, guys. A couple of ways to create motion blur, and I hope that you found them useful. You take care.